My name is Leanne Taylor, and I'm a Canadian elite paratriathlete. I just got back from competing in the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games where I earned a bronze medal. But my journey didn't start here. It actually started in a much less glamorous place in 2018 when I was in a bike crash that resulted in me being paralyzed from the waist down. Throughout the journey of going from a newly injured person to an elite para-athlete, there's so many people along the way that helped and supported me. And when I think about how I can help the next generation of athletes, it's not through anything I have to say, but it's through the amazing things that the athletes who supported me have to say. So I wanted to bring you this podcast so that you guys could get to know some of the amazing athletes who helped inspire me in my journey. I want to start off with Kendall Gretsch, who is not only an amazing para-Nordic skier and an incredible para-triathlete and a competitor of mine, but also an inspiring, interesting human being who is an incredible advocate for the disabled community. And I'm super excited for you guys to get to know more about her. Here's Kendall Gretsch.
Where in the world are you right now, Kendall?
I'm in Canada.
What?
Yeah, we're in Canmore. Got here on the 1st, and I'll be here till like December 5th, probably.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. Although there's
snow yet?
No. They have like saved snow that they save all. So they make a bunch of snow and then they save it all summer long. They have these it's like this massive pit, and they put all the snow in this pit, and then they cover it with like wood chips to protect it from the sun. And somehow that works. And then they have all this snow.
That's crazy.
It is. Yeah. Winter sports, there's so many aspects of it where you're like, this is simply wild. Like people that, if you just don't know about it, it's like the weirdest thing ever.
It just seems like such a big investment of time and energy to have snow, which most of us don't like.
Yeah, I know. Well, but snow in areas where you want to use the snow is really great. But everywhere else, snow is terrible.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why I like winter now. I used to hate it, but now I do a winter sport, and I'm like, oh, snow, it's great.
I grew on you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to start off by talking a bit about you, Kendall, and you're going to hate this because that's who you are. But when I went to look up some background to tell you on Kendall, I was even more amazed by the person that she is and how incredible she has performed in sport. I remember recently we were having a conversation where I'd asked you how many times you'd won world championships, and you simply did not know, which I think speaks volumes to the person you are, but also the athlete that you are, that there's so many that you don't know. But Kendall is a multiple-time Paralympic medalist in Nordic and in the Winter Games, and in triathlon, in paratriathlon in the Summer Games. She has 2 medals in the 2018 Winter Games, 1 in the 2020 Summer Games. In 2022 Winter, she has 3. And then 2024, the Paris most recent Games, she has a silver medal as well in paratriathlon. So incredibly successful athlete, but much more interesting than that in person. So I'm super excited to talk to you today. I thought a fun way to start this would be to talk about how we met. Which maybe you don't remember, but I remember the very first time I met Kendall. It was at my first paratriathlon in Sarasota. And so I didn't know that my first race was a continental championship because that meant nothing to me at the time, but it was. And I met Kendall sitting on the dock getting ready for this race. And I remember thinking that she was so badass and cool and seemed so ready. And I was about to drown in the same lake that she was going to win the race.
I probably did something, and then you were like, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing.
That never happened, but now maybe I would think that. But it was great. And then we became better friends when I was in Canmore for a Nordic trip. I was going to learn how to do some cross-country skiing, and Kendall was there training. And she had recognized a random patch of mountain that I had posted a picture of on Instagram, and then asked me if I wanted to have dinner with her. And I feel like that's how we became friends, which was cool and unique.
Yeah, it was funny because the picture that you posted, we had been driving, and I recognized it from my rear view mirror because I was the one driving. And I was like, I recognize that sunrise. And it was from me looking behind me. But then
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that kind of tracks, you recognizing me from you looking behind you.
Oh gosh.
Kendall beats me in triathlons, in case that wasn't clear. But I wanted to get to know a little bit more about you as a younger person from who you are now. So maybe you can tell me a bit about where you grew up.
Okay, yeah. So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, Downers Grove. Yeah, and I feel like looking back, I feel like it was a pretty normal childhood. So yeah, I was born with my disability. I have spina bifida. But yeah, I guess at the time and growing up, it was like kind of just did everything that my sisters did. So I have two older sisters, and I would say we were in general just like an active family. So we grew up, doing our neighborhood swim team, and all three of us played softball and basketball, and it was just, yeah, that was kind of just like what you did if you were in my family, and that's what I did too. And so, yeah, like I think I was aware, obviously, that I had a disability. It wasn't like I was in this like, yeah, kind of like total naive state, but I think, uh, but yeah, my parents just like, I think they were very, they just like didn't make a big deal about it. It wasn't like, you're going to have to do it and figure it out. They weren't like very overt in that messaging, but it was just like, yeah, kind of just did what I could with everyone else. And yeah, I think that was just like a very positive influence on me. I never felt like super different as a kid. I just, yeah, I just did everything that my sisters did.
You talk about growing up with sisters, and I grew up with a sister too. And one of my friends said this to me recently, and I thought it was so cute. And she said that she's noticed, she also has a sister, and she's noticed that a lot of her friends are people with sisters. And she thinks that changes the way that you make friends in a way. And that correct me if I'm wrong and this doesn't apply to you, but with my sister, we can be like in a screaming fight for 1 second. And then the next second we're like best friends again. Like, I'm like, oh, do you want to hang out though? Cause like I'm bored and I just fought with you and now I have nothing to do. Do you feel like you had that growing up? Do you think that affects your friendships with girls?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there are moments like, it's funny because I feel like my middle sister and we weren't like as close when we were growing up, and but like now we're really close, and so yeah, I think that, yeah, I can definitely see that aspect of like, yeah, you just like
a different friendship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That is a lot of my friends also have sisters. So
now you'll notice
maybe there's something about that theory.
Yeah, I thought it was really cute. For you, you said you did a lot of sport that was not necessarily parasport, which is obviously what you do now. Do you feel like that pushed you? Like, did you feel competitive with able-bodied kids? Did you feel different, or did you just feel like we're all just kids doing different things here?
Yeah, I think, so yeah, I had a little bit more mobility when I was younger. So I think that's what made it easier to be in more traditional sport. So, yeah, like at the time I wasn't using crutches. And I think if that had been the case, we probably would have sought out more opportunities for adaptive sport. But since I could participate, that's just kind of what I did. And yeah, I think that there were times where, like, I feel like I distinctly remember in basketball, like, I was just terrible. Like, I never made baskets, but like,
so was I.
But that was okay.
Without an impairment.
but like in softball, I was a pitcher. And I think in that role, it wasn't a lot of like running around. And, so I could just do it. And then I feel like as I got older, I got to a point where like, I just wasn't competitive as like a base runner. And so I would get on base. I always got walked, which is like, I don't know if it's because I was short, but so I would get to first base and then they would like sub in a runner for me. And so I think, yeah, there were times where it was like, okay, here is like a modification. But like overall, it was just like, well, I'm just glad that I'm here participating and I can be here with my friends, and like I can be what I felt like was, on par with the rest of the kids as a pitcher. And I think that was the great thing about swimming is it is an individual sport. So I had all these goals individually of like, okay, I want to have this time in this event. And it didn't really matter what everyone else was doing. Because since it's a time-based sport, you're just competing with yourself. So I think that actually is translated really well to being an athlete now, of just instilling that mindset of like the biggest marker you want to have is just comparing against yourself and like improving day to day against yourself. And that's definitely a mindset that I have now.
That makes a lot of sense. When you first went into swimming, so you did more team sports when you were younger, and then as you got older, moved more to individual sports. Would you say that one of them feels more like you? Like, do you feel more comfortable playing team sports, or do you think you're more of an individual sport person?
Ooh. I feel like, oh, that's a good question. I feel like team sports sounds so fun, right? Like to have a group of people, or I always like in triathlon when we do the relay, or in skiing when you do a relay. I love that. I get so stressed out though. I feel like it's nice almost to have an individual sport, because it's like, well, I'm only responsible for myself and like what I do. Whereas when you do a relay, I feel so much pressure of like, okay, I really want to perform well, because it's not just for me, it's like for all my teammates too. But part of it's like fun and nerve-wracking. So I don't know. That doesn't really answer your question.
That's okay. It's still interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I feel like a lot of the time you meet people in individual sport who, like, when I think of you, I do think of you as like a team sport kind of oriented person. Like you're not a, like, just me alone, want to train alone in isolation kind of person. So I think it's interesting that you compete in individual sports. But yeah, you're right. Like both triathlon and Nordic have elements of team sports when you do relays. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think that is true. Like I guess the team environment, even though it is an individual sport, that's kind of the position that I've put myself into for both of my sports. So I think I first had the opportunity with Nordic one winter where the entire team was out training together, and we trained together every single day. And that environment of being surrounded by a team was something that I really liked, even though it was an individual sport. But you're working together to become better. And that was something immediately that I knew at the time for triathlon. I had been training on my own. And so I knew that I wanted to put myself in a team environment. And yeah, I always think that, like, regardless of whether it's I think as an individual sport athlete, I just do much better when I'm in a group setting.
Yeah, I think that I didn't realize that about myself so much until I started training with you. And then I was like, oh, why am I faster for no reason? And I think it just being around other people, they just push you in a really nice way, I find, like in a way, rather than if you're responsible to like a certain power, a certain time, or a certain metric, you feel kind of stressed about it. Whereas I always felt like racing you in training, it made it fun and funny to be like, oh, I'm ahead, that's funny. Or like, oh, I'm behind, like I'll better put in an extra effort. But it always kind of just like, seemed entertaining to me in like a really nice way, as opposed to sometimes I found you have like a really specific power metric that you're trying to hit, and you put a more negative pressure on yourself. So it's interesting that you would say that too.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like, it's nice because we compete and you're not competing in this bubble. You're surrounded by people. And so if you can put yourself in that scenario every day in your training where, like we're competitive people. And when we're training together, like, I want to beat you. Like, I want you to get better too. But
I think this is the first time Kendall has formally admitted that she wants to beat me. I'm very flattered by this.
But yeah, so it's like, it pushes you because you're like, oh, okay, like I can't slack here. Whereas I feel like if you were on your own, you might be like, oh, well, I'm tired. And then you
close
would
enough.
fade a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You had talked about, as you were growing up, becoming more impaired. Can you talk about why that is and kind of explain what happened in your life in that aspect?
Yeah. So, it's called like a retethering of my spinal cord. So basically as I was growing up, this was right before high school. I started to develop scoliosis, and that was just a sign that I was having this retethering. So around my spinal cord, there was scar tissue that was building up, and then that obviously it almost like cuts off the circulation to the nerves in your spinal cord. So and then it can make like your muscles weaker, and so yeah, we're seeing this trend that like my right side was stronger than my left side was. And so yeah, right before high school, I had a surgery where they go in and they were just like cleaning up all of the scar tissue that was built up around my spinal cord. So ever since that surgery, that's when I started using my crutches. So kind of after that surgery, I never like fully regained the strength that I had before. And so since then, I guess I would say my strength has been relatively stable. But yeah, so now kind of in day-to-day life, I use like leg braces and crutches, and then a wheelchair when I'm around Leanne and Scott, and they tell me that's so much better.
I love that you laughed at that. And it's not that it's necessarily funny to use a wheelchair, but for background, Scott, more so than me, really started bullying Kendall about using a wheelchair because he felt that, I don't know why he's trying to make her faster, but he felt that it would be a rest for her arms, because when Kendall uses her forearm crutches, a lot of weight is in her arms. So she has to just have like that additional fatigue. And so he thought, I don't know why Scott thinks he's an expert in these things. But he thought that it would be easier for her if she used a wheelchair more. And so now every time he sees Kendall in her wheelchair, he makes a big fuss out of it and embarrasses her and makes her less likely to use it in the future, I think.
No, but it is true. I mean, I feel like I've learned that there are times where it's like, it's such a great thing. And I think that's the thing about like mobility and disability is like it's a spectrum, and there's such a range, and like all of these things are just tools that are available for you to use. And so there are times where it makes more sense for me to use my crutches, but then there's times where like, yeah, being in a wheelchair, like when we were touring around Paris or all of these cities, like I can just see so much more of the world when I'm in my wheelchair. So
because you're not having to look at the ground for stability.
Yeah, or just like there's no way I could walk more than a mile on my crutches. I just would get way too tired. And so if I'm in my wheelchair, I can be out all day going around. And so yeah, there are times where it makes way more sense to use a wheelchair. Yeah.
On the flip side, did you have hesitation to start using it? Like, was there a reason why you were like, oh, I maybe don't want to?
I don't know. I think, I feel like this almost sounds bad, is like, part of it has to do with like sport. Like, I feel like there's kind of this weird, thing in sport around classification of like people thinking that like, you might be faking it, or like you're over exaggerating how disabled you are. And yeah, so I guess I was always a little bit nervous of like, oh, if people see me using my wheelchair instead of my crutches, then they think that I'm like trying to fake something. And I think that's such a terrible thing, because it's like, no, this is just the mobility device and the tool that makes the most sense for me to use right now. And I think there's probably some other aspect of like, yeah, like using a wheelchair. I don't know. I think for me that really, that was kind of my biggest hesitation of why I wouldn't use it, or, yeah.
I think that's so valid. And I remember the first time we like had a discussion about this, really realizing that it's true that people would say stuff, and not to make you feel worse or to make you have more hesitation. But I think that's the reality that we're in. And it's strange that in parasport, you have this kind of double-edged sword of the point in some ways of doing what we do is to empower the disabled community. And then on the other side, because of classification, because it's become so competitive, which is what we want, there's also people who have comments to make about different people's impairments or classification. And that's hard to hear. So it makes sense that you'd feel that way, but I'm glad that you now kind of just use whatever makes the most sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's like, it is such a weird thing. And I think, parasport is interesting, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. I think it still has all of the same problems as regular sport. Like, I think people have this idea that people in the disabled community are so different from just people, and that's not true at all. And so while like a lot of it is positive and wonderful, some of it is saying things that aren't helpful or having the negative side of competition. It's all there still.
Yeah.
So you explained that you had become more impaired going into high school. What was that like for you? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think at the time I was so focused on like physical therapy. And I think we didn't know at the time like how much I was going to be able to regain back after. So I think for a while it kind of started out of like, oh, maybe this is just kind of like a temporary state and I might be able to get back to where I was before. And then I think, it was kind of, I just got to the point where I was like, no, just like, I'm just going to be using crutches going forward. Like, that's kind of how it is. And I think it didn't actually sink in for me, or like feel different in my life until I actually went to college. And I think the big thing that changed for me was when I was in high school, there were all these people that they knew me before I had the surgery. They knew me after. So they kind of knew both sides. But when I went to college, that was all people knew. People only knew that I used crutches. And I think that just became, I feel like kind of when I was in high school, I had kind of like the feelings from when I was younger of like, oh yeah, I do have a disability, but like, I felt like I just fit in for a really long time. Whereas like when I went to college, I feel like people started asking more about it or just like needing more accommodations, just being on a bigger campus for things. And I think the part of it of just like, no one knew me before. And so that's when I just started to think about it more of like myself as having a disability. Whereas before I didn't really think about it as much, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I remember going back after I was injured, I went back to work and I was most nervous, actually kind of the opposite. I was most nervous to see the people who knew me before because it just felt like you could see their reaction and you could just feel like their response to you being so different. But I kind of know what you mean in the sense that people do really see people with disabilities sort of differently. And so when you're around people who know your whole story, they kind of know this whole version of you. Whereas I guess in college, you were sort of presenting like a new version of you that was like not what you were used to people knowing about you.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think that made it, I know you were in a sorority in college, which I'm from Canada, so we don't have as many sororities. So that seems really cool to me.
Oh, gosh.
And our producer James, who's listening to this, probably lives in the UK, so probably thinks this is even more cool, and maybe he doesn't know what it is. So can you tell us what that is and what that's like?
Oh man, yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like maybe your guys' impression then of a sorority is very different than my experience was, because I feel like the stereotypical like sorority was kind of not my experience, but yeah, so at my school really it was just like a club, and a large portion of my school was actually like did Greek life, so I think it was like maybe like 70% of the school was in some sort of sorority or fraternity, and yeah, so for us, it really was just like a club. We didn't all live together. We didn't have a house or anything, but yeah, it was like a social club that you joined, and then we did different events, and yeah, I don't know. That was kind
I'm
of
impressed. It's very cool.
Not too wild.
Slightly disappointed that it wasn't too wild, but that's pretty cool.
You had talked a bit about what it was like to be in high school and have people kind of know your story and know your kind of journey into being one kind of disabled athlete to a different kind of disabled athlete. Do you think it was strange then to introduce yourself to people in college? Like, did you feel like there was like, you had to explain your disability, or do you think people reacted differently to you than to their other able-bodied students? I don't know, man. Well, this was a long time ago, but
you still look so young.
Yeah, I think the things that stood out, it was almost like people were asking me more questions on, like, yeah, kind of like what accommodations I would need, or you'll find this funny because you know that I go to the bathroom all the time. But I got asked to do, it was like an article for our student newspaper about how, like what bathroom access looked like for disabled students.
How did they know?
Yeah.
You'd be like, I know what every single one is.
Exactly. I said that. I was part of my interview of like, well, I know where every bathroom is. They're like, okay. But yeah, it was basically about like, what are the things that like, as a disabled student, like what are things that you think about that maybe other students aren't thinking about? And I think, I don't know how bathrooms were tied to that exactly, but
it's different. People have to ask you about it, or like you have to explain it, and you didn't have to before because people had kind of always known you.
Yeah. Or like I was on a couple of panels that like students were groups that were doing, and I was like brought onto the panel as like the disabled student. And so I think that, yeah, there were times where it was like, oh, okay, like I am clearly just like in this category.
That you didn't really feel in before.
Yeah. Or it just was like, there were so many other things that I identified with before. So it like, again, yeah, I wasn't like completely naive. Like I knew I was disabled, but it wasn't like, that wasn't like the thing that I was getting asked about the most. And so I feel like when I was in college, that became more of like a centerpiece of what people would ask.
The first questions they would ask you.
Yeah.
I had a weird experience kind of vaguely related to this. At a bachelorette party once, I was like floating around. We were in Las Vegas and I was floating around in a tube. And so when floating around in a tube as a wheelchair user, you can't tell that I have a disability. And I was already engaged at this time, so I was not interested in the person who came up to talk to me, but a guy came up to talk to me and asked if he could buy me a drink and stuff. And we were kind of chatting with him, with my sister. And when we went to leave the pool, we were like kind of trying to ditch him and not be too rude. And my sister and I are very bad at that. And so when we went to leave the pool, my friends like brought my wheelchair over, and he would just like went white. Like he was like shook that he had been like hitting on this disabled girl. And I was like, excuse me, like that's so rude that you like now feel weird about this when you didn't before. And like, I mean, he wasn't someone that I was interested in. I was engaged and it didn't matter, but it was really weird. Like that, I think was for me, like one of the first times that I had seen like that difference in reaction of like how someone would react to you, like knowing you have a disability versus like how they might treat you before. And it just like shocks me that like in our world that people actually do feel like it's so different when I don't feel different from when I wasn't disabled. And I feel like probably you never really felt like a disability was a significant part of your personality, but people like it matters to them for some reason.
Yeah, no, definitely. It kind of,
I think that that's one of the things too that kind of gets perpetuated in like media and whatnot, like that must be the thing that's like the biggest focus in all of our lives, when it's like, really, no. Like,
yeah. It's the least interesting thing about you.
Yeah, exactly. Or just like, we are just regular people, and the things that we're thinking about like day to day are not sure. There are some aspects that like we are thinking about different things than other people, but like for the most part, our general lived experience is like very similar to what other people are thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. What did you go to school for? University?
I studied biomedical engineering, and then proceeded not to do anything with that.
That's not true.
I mean, it's kind of true. Yeah.
I was just busy being a Paralympic medalist in 2 sports, and so I'm going to beat myself up over not practicing engineering for This is Kendall. So what did you do instead when you graduated university, since you were not being an engineer? What were you doing?
Well, I did work after I graduated, just not in engineering. So yeah, I worked at a software company for it was like 4.5 years full time, where I was working there, and that's when I had just found out about paratriathlon and kind of just like what the Paralympics were really when I was in college.
In college.
Yeah.
How did you find out?
So yeah, I guess the very first time I heard about it was when I was in high school. My swim coach's son knew someone that was in an accident, and he had been a swimmer and then became a Paralympic swimmer. And so my swim coach was like, "Oh, like, is this something that you can do?" And I didn't know. And so I tried to research and figure out like what paraswimming was. And I read all the classification documents, and it was just so confusing at the time. And I was like, I don't qualify for this. Like, I don't use a wheelchair full time. I have all of my limbs. Like, it's just like, I don't fit in any of these categories. And so I thought that I just didn't qualify for it. And yeah, so it wasn't until I was in college and I was reading about someone that was training on their college swim team to go to London. And I think he had CP, but it was just like, he looked very similar to what I thought, or like he fit into
functionally, you guys were similar.
Yeah, functionally similar. And he just like, he fit into the box that I felt like I fit in of like, didn't fit the classifications that I had read about. And I was like, oh, like I was wrong. This is something that I could do. And so yeah, that's when I reached out to a group in Chicago that was doing an adaptive swim practice. And I asked if I could go there. And while I was there, they invited me to do their track practice, which was right after. And that's when I got on a racing wheelchair for the first time. And the person that was running that practice, she had just started a paratriathlon club based in Chicago. And so then she invited me to their practices. She signed me up for a camp. She signed me up for a race. And so it's kind of like this whole thing.
You're doing this.
I went to one swim practice, and then I ended up doing all this stuff with triathlon. But it was like exactly what I needed, because I was just so confused. I didn't know how to get into all of this stuff. And she just made it so easy. And it was like, yeah, you are doing this. And I was like, okay, great. Because I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was Dare to Try. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
We can shout them out. We like them.
Yes. Yeah. Great organization.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was it like the first time you went in a racing wheelchair? And I ask this because you're so good at this portion of triathlon. Like, I feel like you are really like kind of a natural in the racing wheelchair. And most people find that when they get in it, it's very uncomfortable and awkward, and they don't love it. So I'm interested to hear what your experience was like.
Yeah. I loved it. I don't know if I was good, but
did you feel good?
I think I was just excited because it was, I really did feel like a little kid that whole time frame from like
2012 when I first started when I went to that first swim practice, to 2014, I like tried out all of these different things. I went to all these adaptive sport clinics and I was the oldest one there. It was like me and a bunch of 7-year-olds trying out wheelchair tennis for the first time. But it was so fun because it was like, oh my gosh, I always knew that I was competitive with myself, but it was like, now I have this outlet where I can be competitive and I can be competing against other people on like a level playing field. Like I don't need to be last in every single swim race that I do. Like this is,
in fact, you find yourself not last quite often now.
Yeah. So I think I was just excited by the possibility of it. And it was like a new challenge of something that I could figure out and master. And yeah. So I think mainly just excited.
Something that strikes me about your experience is that you talk about being last in your swim races and then joining your tennis club with 7-year-olds. And I feel like you must have just loved sport. Like a lot of people, and I felt the same because I remember too joining like a para swimming club where everyone was younger than me and I was worse than them. And they were probably like, what is this? And I was like not young at all. I was probably like 27. And so even more so, I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm like, could be these children's parents and they're beating me in the pool. But I still just love sport. Is that why you did it? Or like, what do you think like kept you coming back, even though it didn't have some of the aspects that we now get to enjoy about sport, like being with your peers?
Yeah, so I think originally it was just this new competitive outlet. And I feel like I've said it before of like, I think someone was interviewing me once and they're like, oh, it must have just felt like this whole new like door was open for you and things like that. And I said like, it doesn't feel like it was just a door. Like someone built me an entire new house. Like I just had like all of this new stuff that was available for me. And I was excited about it. Like this whole thing that I didn't know existed for me. And yeah, I was a huge sports fan. Like any of my friends will tell you that I was a huge Olympics nerd. Like I would watch any single clip that was available. And like, I would just get sucked in and I would watch everything. And, so like there's definitely just that love of sport in general. But yeah, I do think that like what kept me going with triathlon or what made me land on triathlon was the people. And so I think that's very like ties back to what I loved about sports when I was a kid, is just being able to be around my friends and be active with my friends. And there's a lot of that I feel in triathlon now. Like I don't think I would be doing it, or like I know I wouldn't be doing it still if it wasn't for the people that I've met through the sport. Yeah, like you.
I so wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think it's interesting because I think that as an athlete who had been in the sport for longer than me, I think that a lot of the reason that our sport has the culture that it has is from athletes like you. And just because no one who's listening to this necessarily knows, I met Kendall through triathlon and then had the opportunity, or was affectionately bullied by Howie, to come in and train with you guys in the US, which I wanted to do, but was very nervous because Kendall and Howie were both much better at the sport than me. And so I was nervous to go and train with them. And also I kind of thought they were a big deal and was shy. And I went to train with you guys. And at the time that I had gone to train with you guys, we had noticed that my bike flexed a lot more when I got in it compared to other people, which Howie really politely pointed out by asking me how much I weigh. Which I was like, excuse me, why are we asking this? And then he had said that why he was asking that was because when I got into the bike, my frame flexed more than him. And he was surprised by that I would weigh more than him. And I didn't. He wanted to point out that this was strange about my bike. And then we found out that the frame of my bike had some damage on it, and that we took it to someone who would repair carbon, and they told me that it couldn't be used. And we were 2 weeks out from World Championships, which was the worlds that we needed to qualify for the Paris 2024 Paralympics. And Kendall, who I knew
very little really at the time, had invited me to come to their training center, and we sat on the floor in their garage where they do their training while Kendall put a piece of her old bike onto mine, which was like, I say a piece, but it was like 90% of the bike. And like helped me to cobble together this bike so that I could race in Worlds. And this piece, I think, was worth like $10,000 US. And so I was like sweating by this concept in general that like Kendall would want to do this for me and that she's my competitor and she'd want to help me and that I was going to use her bike. And then ultimately I crashed it, which was just so terrible.
No, you did it.
And then I crossed the finish line in this race. I came in 5th after crashing, which was still enough to qualify for the games. And the first thing Kendall said to me was, "Did I make you crash by passing you? Was it because I passed you too close to the corner?" And I was just like, at that time, I was like, who is this woman? Like the nicest freaking person. And I feel like that, like having met that way says so much about who you are as a person and who you are as an athlete that you not like, I think this is so normal to you that you don't recognize how rare it is for you to go that far out of your way to help your competition. Like, it's not typical. It's really lovely. And I wanted to tell you that, which probably makes you uncomfortable. But I think it's really cool. And then one of the things that also stood out to me is that you were the first person that I believed when you told me that you thought I could be on the podium in the games. And you said it to me like at breakfast one time when I was at the training center, and I feel like to you again, it was just like a random comment. And I was like, Kendall Gretsch thinks so, like that's a big deal. And then for me, when I imagined going to the games, one of the things that I imagined the whole time was like being on the podium with you. And I think it was so cool that like, not only did we get to be on the podium at the games, but for me that I got to be on the podium at the games with a friend, I feel like is so much more rare than just being there. And I think it's so cool that what our sport culture has, it's so unique compared to other sports, which I'm sure are great as well, is that we have so much value on that, on like not just like going to the games or winning medals and doing the thing, but also on like the person that you are and the people that you meet as you go through sport. That's just my random little plug for paratriathlon. That's the best sport culture. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, and I think that's true. So I had a couple of years after Tokyo where I just was like, I was so hard on myself and I was so focused on the result. Like everything that you're not supposed to do as an athlete, like that's all I could think about was the outcome of the race. And I just felt like I was failing all the time because I wasn't winning any races. And I know it sounds like really petty and like crazy, but it just like over and over again, I felt like I was failing every single race. And I had to really stop and think like, why am I even still doing this? Like why I could easily stop. Like I don't need to be doing this. It felt like I was just torturing myself. But I knew that there was something about triathlon that I still loved and I wanted to keep going. And so I really had to think about like, what is it that I want to change and how I'm approaching things that will make me stay in the sport, but also like I want to fall back in love with the sport and I want to love what I'm doing. And for me, a big piece of that was like building up the sport and finding other athletes and like, how can we progress the whole sport together? And how can we work together as athletes and like all get better together? And that way, when we're showing up on the start line, it could be like anyone's day. Like anyone could go out there and win the race. And it's not just like a couple of people that would win in the race. And that was my goal and that was my focus. And so it became about the people in the sport for me. And yeah, it's just made me so much happier doing that. And I think, yeah, it's made me a better athlete too. Like I'm not like slower for it or anything. Like I'm actually much faster. I'm a much better athlete than I was 4 years ago. But I'm so much happier having that focus. And I think, yeah, part of me is really happy because I do feel like we're getting there. We're getting to the point where everyone's really like getting to that same level on the sport. You don't know what the outcome is going to be at the start of the race. And I think that's just exciting. And it helps you it helps you separate yourself as an athlete, where it's like, I'm not just the result. It's just like, no, that's just what happened on the day.
I think it's so nice to hear someone say that you don't think that makes you a worse athlete. Because I think a lot of people do. Like, I think a lot of people would look at the way that I approach sport maybe and be like, oh, she's kind of messing around a little bit. Like, she's like, you know what I mean? Like, half there to have fun, half there to do the thing. And maybe that's why, you know, like I didn't win at World Championships, but you just said that and you did. And so I think it's really cool to hear the athletes kind of across the board just say like, there's more to this than just winning. And I think that it's so awesome. And it makes you such a good role model for other people coming into the sport to see how successful you are. And then also to have that attitude that we don't have to torture ourselves about the results that we didn't get, which is always going to be the case, that sometimes we don't get the result we expected. I want to ask you about Tokyo because it was the single most exciting race I've ever seen in sport in general, which is so cool that it was in para. I just think it's awesome that like my favorite sport moment, and honestly more people's favorite sport moment than you realize, is your moment in Tokyo. Do you want to tell what happened?
Sure.
No, I don't.
Well, yeah. So I guess for those that aren't familiar, so Leanne and I, we are in the wheelchair category for triathlon, which is split into 2 subcategories. So we all compete against each other, but we start at a different time. So because I have more function than the other category,
I didn't make a face.
You did make a face. Yeah. So I start in a group that's behind. So we have H1 and H2. So I'm in the H2 category. So yeah, so I start behind, in the race. So yeah, so the entire race, I'm kind of playing catch up, and then it's like whatever order you cross the line, that's the order that we finish in.
So Kendall starts the race 3 minutes, and you probably know the exact seconds, 28 seconds, 38 seconds.
I think it's 58. It's 58.
Almost 4 minutes behind me in the race.
Tokyo, it was 4 minutes and 8 seconds. I knew that.
Wow. It's getting closer. Yeah. So yeah, a significant time disadvantage. And the reason I made a face is not because I'm salty that Kendall has more function than me, because that's probably what it looks like. But our classification is such that there's only 2 categories. And so I think that Kendall is impressive for how strong of an athlete she is to be in her category, because she has quite an impairment that is more significant than people understand. So for example, in the swim, I would have thought that someone who walks with a forearm crutches was actually kicking in the swim. But when I watch you swim, you don't kick in the swim. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I don't kick. So I can hold my legs together, which like that is very helpful. So compared to like the other athletes in the H1 category that have to use like a brace to hold their legs together. So like you swim with a brace. Me telling me what you do. you know. But yeah, so like I can hold my legs together. But yeah, I'm not able to kick.
So even more reasons why I think Kendall's impressive, because I affectionately call her an H1.5, because I think she has some more function than me, but is also just an absolute stud to be able to close her 4-minute gap, which I think is just the coolest. Anyway, I distracted you with this. What were we talking about? Triathlon. What's a triathlon?
So yeah, we start in the 4-minute gap, and I guess maybe the context of that I think is important, because so in the end in Tokyo, the race comes down to the run. So I'm kind of steadily making up this 4-minute time gap to Lauren, who was leading the entire race. And but yeah, like on each segment of the race, I'm putting in time. And yeah, so it literally came down to the last second, and yeah, at like basically at the finish line, I passed her, and I crossed the finish line 1 second before her in Tokyo.
The coolest finish ever. So I remember watching this from my couch at home, and I didn't qualify for Tokyo. I had only been injured for 2 years, but Kendall did. And so Kendall is coming into the finish chute and I can see her on the blue carpet. And I'm like, she's going so fast. Like, do you have speed data from that chute? Do you know how fast you went in the finish chute?
I have to imagine it was like somewhere between 15 and 17 miles an hour.
Which in Canadian, do you know what that is? Like, I feel like 30 kilometers an hour, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so bad at Ks, so I don't know.
Me too. This is a deficit in math, but we'll leave it here for someone to figure out. I think it was like 30 kilometers an hour would be my guess. So fast, so impressive. And you wouldn't normally think that, I don't think anybody else in the field could close that gap. But she was like absolutely flying, but you almost looked like you weren't going to have enough space. Like if you had enough time that you were going to catch up, like you were going so fast, it looked clear that you were going to catch up, but you looked like you were going to run out of space. But then, so when you were watching this race, you don't even know who wins at the end because they're so close. So you know that Kendall's going faster, but Lauren is ahead. And so you have no idea who wins. And then I had to watch the replay and then was still stressed because you see the replay and you think you see it a certain way, but I wasn't sure at what point they judged. And maybe you didn't even know this at the time, like what point they judged who is in front. Yeah. Like how do you, because Kendall's front wheel crosses first, but I'm like, do they judge it from the front wheel or is it from the person's body? Like I didn't know how, like we had never seen a race that was so close that it even mattered to know how they judged who had won in this situation. And so I remember being so stressed and I got more confidence that he had won because I could hear on the audio from the race, the US team was just screaming. Like from the moment that they saw you until like 5 minutes after you had finished, they were just screaming, which was so cool and so exciting. And I think just to have such an exciting finish was amazing. And then also to, demonstrate that how many athletes can perform at that really high caliber was so exciting. So the coolest finish. And then it's interesting to hear you say that you struggled a little bit after that too, because I think people hear athletes who are so successful and have these like amazing finishes and super cool Paralympic moments. And then people just think like their life is sunshine and rainbows. And there was me kind of at the same time training and being pretty far behind you and Lauren and the other athletes and thinking like, oh, it's all awesome over there. Like they're winning and they're having a great time and it's perfect. And so it's so interesting to hear that at that same time, then you felt like you put so much pressure on yourself to perform a certain way in those races that I would show up to and be like, oh, it must be nice to be Kendall and not suck at this. You kind of were feeling the same way, like going to those same races, probably thinking like, it's the worst to suck at this, which is so funny because no one did. But it's one of those things that you feel in sport, you're so hard on yourself. So it's nice to hear someone who has like such a great experience in sport also say they feel the same way.
Yeah, I think like Tokyo is obviously, it's like my greatest sport accomplishment, I would say, or just like, and it's not just about the result for me. It was like so much about that day and just like how I felt during the race. It was just one of those like I think every athlete has that feeling where like a lot of times in a race, like you can feel good, you can feel okay, you can feel really bad, but like there are so few times where you just feel great. And I felt like
the whole time,
great the entire time. And it was like, I just knew like even on the bike, I think maybe like second lap in, I could tell that the time was coming down and I knew it was going to be a close race. Like I didn't know, obviously, it was going to be that close. But I knew it was going to be close. And I'm like, wow, this is just like I'm just having so much fun. Like, this is so cool. This is such a great experience. And yeah, like the team that was in the stands, like it was during COVID. So no one else, like no other spectators were allowed. But since we raced the second day, all of the athletes that raced the first day for the triathlon were allowed in. So it was just like true triathlon fans, I guess.
They knew what you had been through to be there.
And I could just like, I could hear them the entire time. And so, yeah, that memory is like, it's so special. But afterwards, I just felt like that was going to define me. And I didn't want that to be like my only thing that I ever did in triathlon. And so I think that's why I did put so much pressure on myself, was just like trying to recreate that day, recreate that moment, or just, like that, prove that it wasn't just a fluke or like that was just a one-time thing. And so yeah, I think that's where it just got so hard, where it was like everyone saw what I did on that day, and I think just expected that I could keep doing it, do it every day again. And then when I couldn't, and like not even one time, I was just like, what is going on? And yeah, so that it was really hard. And but I think that that's like everyone as an athlete, like whether the outside story is like not what fully is going on. And so whether you're finishing first or you're finishing last, like everyone can have such different experience and feeling about that race that like probably doesn't match what people would think they're going to feel about that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's so true. I'm curious then, how did you feel about Paris?
Yeah, Paris was interesting because I had felt so good going into that race. And yeah, for whatever reason, like that day, my swim, I felt amazing. That was actually like, I feel like one of my best swims that I've ever had in a triathlon. And the bike, I started out and I felt great. And then it was just kind of like maybe 2 laps in, I just was like, oh, I don't know. I just feel like 85% here. Like I don't feel terrible, but I just like that kind of extra pop that I feel like I want to have, or like I know that I have, is just not there. And I just kept thinking like, okay, well, maybe if I start just like chugging my carb drink, like that will make me feel better. And then I was like, well, maybe once I get on the run, I'm going to feel better once I get on the run. And I just was like, I just like feel slightly off there. And so yeah, I feel very mixed about Paris because I feel like I didn't get to like showcase my full, all the training potential and everything that I did in training. But I also think that like there's so much about that race that I'm really proud of. Like, I don't think even last year I would have had that same mindset throughout the race of like, well, just like, what can I do now? What is it that I can do right now that is going to potentially like turn my situation around or make me feel better? Or I think before I would have kind of just spiraled and started panicking that like, oh my gosh, it's like the biggest race of, the whole quad and it's not going how I want it to. So I think being able to maintain that mindset is something that I'm really proud of. And yeah, at the end of the day, like that whole day was it was such a great day for our team. And like, yeah, being able to share the podium with you, that was my secret mission.
The coolest.
But yeah, I think so there's so many things where it's like, even though it personally wasn't the performance that I was hoping for, but like all the other things that made that day so great, like that's why I'm actually doing this.
Yeah. And like they weren't taken away by just one part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
What about Worlds? So you just won World Championships, which I think maybe felt like a little bit of like a turnaround in comparison to Paris, to be like a little disappointed with that day. Was Worlds one of those days, like were you firing on all cylinders, or did the outcome just turn out positive even though maybe you still didn't feel like it was everything?
Yeah, I think so. Originally after Paris, my plan had been like, oh, I'll just go into vacation mode and I'll go to Worlds and we'll see. Which is like totally fair. Like that's what you should do after the games. And I just knew I pretty much decided like the day after Paris that like, okay, I just want to have one more race where I can like be able to execute to the full potential that I put in. Like this was 3+ years of all this work, and like I don't want it to end on this race. And so yeah, I knew that I was going to put in another training block, really just with the thought of like can I just maintain the fitness that I'm and yeah, and so I feel like I went into Worlds and was it the best race of my life? I don't know, but like I just felt strong throughout the whole thing. And that's what I wanted. I just wanted like that feeling of, okay, this is more of an accurate reflection of like all of that work that I did for 3 years. And so yeah, I know that I feel like the actual result doesn't necessarily matter.
It's not about that.
Much. Yeah, it was just like I just wanted to have that feeling of the race.
I knew that you won in Worlds because when I crossed the finish line, they were interviewing you. And I had to try really, really hard not to yell something stupid because I wanted to so badly. And then even though I just yelled something tame, I feel like you still turned around and saw me cross the finish line in the middle of your interview. So sorry for interrupting you. But I was so excited. And I feel like that's like the gift that you get by approaching sport this way is that like I didn't necessarily have like my day at Worlds. It wasn't my best day. And I didn't even have time to be disappointed about that because you had just won. And so I think that's so cool that you get to like, by choosing to make friends with your competitors, you get to have that day or that feeling like for yourself or for someone else. And it honestly feels almost as good, which is so cool.
Yeah.
So thanks for making that happen because I enjoyed celebrating post Worlds with you because you did so well because my teammate Steph and Daniel also won. So pretty special day. My last question is about the World celebration actually. And so Kendall and I had the pleasure of spending some time together after Worlds. And because she had won, we had a lot to celebrate. And my teammate too, Steph and Daniel had also won. So we had a lot to celebrate on our end. And I am interested to hear you talk a bit about balance because I feel like people see athletes like yourself, especially we didn't talk about Nordics very much, which I'm sorry for, mostly because I know nothing about it. But Kendall also competes and does incredibly well in Nordic skiing and biathlon, which are both incredibly cool sports, even though they're done on the snow, which is the worst. And so I'm curious as to like how you find balance in training and racing, and do you take a lot of time to celebrate? And do you think that's important?
Yeah, I think so. I would say people probably like look at me and think it's not balanced. And yeah, there are definitely times where I wish that I had more time to like go spend time at family or whatever it is. But I do think that it's so important to take that time and yeah, like kind of take that break because we're not just a machine, and like you are going to get mentally tired, you're going to get physically tired, and you need to take that break if you want to keep going at this level because it can get exhausting. And so I think that you need to have that balance, and even like day to day too. Like there are certain things that I'll do, whether it's like being out later with friends or just like talking up late with friends, and that to me, like sure, maybe my sleep isn't as great for that night or whatever, but that to me of like being able to have that social interaction is so much more important in the long run than maybe the impact that we'll have on that one day, the next day or whatever it is. So I think you have to know like when those things matter the most and like when it is going to make a difference, and you can't be like totally crazy all the time. But yeah, there has to be a balance with stuff.
I think one of the things that's always like kind of a favorite part to me about parasport is like the hodgepodge of logistics that goes into like celebrating with para athletes. So at one point when we were going out to celebrate in Spain, we had 5 wheelchairs in a single Uber. And so in order to fit 5 wheelchairs in a single Uber, they had to take, not us, we just got in like princesses, but my husband and my friend's wife had to take the wheels off of all the wheelchairs and then put them all in separately into this Uber and then try to like reassemble the wheelchairs, and my husband had a few beers, and so his capacity for wheelchair reassembly was diminished. And I feel like these are the things that just make you really have perspective about your disability, and things that from the outside might make other people feel sad to see them, like, are so funny to us. And another thing that sort of stood out to me about that celebration was when we were walking, we had to walk kind of a long way because we were trying to find a bar in a desert, in a pretty quiet, deserted area. And so we were walking along a decent way. And I say walking, but we weren't walking, but along the waterfront. And one of my teammates had decided that it would be more fun than for us to not push our own wheelchairs, but to be like projected down the sidewalk. Like in the way that slingshot it down the sidewalk. Thank you. And I feel like I wish more people saw that aspect of being disabled, that like in that context, like on that particular walk, it was more fun to be the one in the wheelchair than not, because we were getting slingshotted and everyone else was just walking. And so I feel like that's like some of the really special things for me about parasport are like those types of memories of being, of coming into it pretty early on in my injury. And at the time, not being super comfortable with being a wheelchair user and not knowing what it was going to be like, and everyone telling me it was going to be this like sad thing. And then I'm getting like slingshotted down the streets in Spain and being like, it's really not so bad. And so I think that that's one of the really special things about parasport. And I don't know if any of those types of moments, is that something that stands out for you? And can you think of any like examples of that when you were like, oh, this is like not what people think it is?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe one of the things that I thought of when you were saying that is like, I think it's cool in paratriathlon that we're around people with all different types of disabilities, and you truly realize that like you all will help each other out in different ways. So whether it's someone with a visual impairment or a hand impairment or something like that, like everyone needs some sort of like accommodation or something that they probably need help with. And so I think it's like that to me is fun or cool to see that like you grow and gain a perspective of someone else from these experiences that you probably wouldn't if you were just kind of like, not involved in parasport. So that's always definitely something that I'm thankful for.
Yeah, I think I've heard it said that the disabled community is kind of one of the only unique communities that people can become a part of anytime, and likely will become a part of as they age. And I think there's so much fear associated with that. Like if we kind of went around telling everyone like, you're going to be disabled in the future when you're old, people wouldn't like that, and they would be afraid, and they would think that it was like this offensive thing or this like negative thing. And I think it's so nice that like parasport and being around a community of other people with disabilities, they don't feel that way. I remember one time talking with Jess, who is a visually impaired athlete. She is completely blind, and she was on my team, our paratriathlon team in the past. And one time I was swimming, and she like kind of swam up beside me, and she was like, "It's so crazy that you do this without your legs." And I'm like, "Girlfriend, like can't see where you're going." Like we're both like equally impressed by the other person's like ability to do the sport. And I think that's what makes it so cool, is that everyone gets to like kind of be in that environment and be in awe of each other in so many ways, and just appreciate what everybody is capable of, disabled or not. To be able to do triathlon, I think it's a challenging sport, and it's just so cool to be in that community of people who are like, oh, you think that this is going to be difficult for me? Like, I kind of think you're wrong.
Yeah.
The coolest. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to ask you about. Is there anything that you really wanted to talk about, or something that you felt like we missed?
I don't think so. I feel like covered a lot here.
Yeah. No kidding. My last question then is just, if you had something that you could say, or that you could have young Kendall know that you know now, is there something that you would tell her?
Oh. I guess I've never thought about it in the way of like young myself.
You could answer it if it's something you would say to other people too, but I always think it's interesting to be like, oh, if I knew, like when I think about if I knew where I was going to end up 5 years after I was injured, when I was injured, I like wouldn't have cried so much, you know, like I would have been like, it's not like, I would have been like, wow, it's really like not so bad. And I think like everybody, like the society kind of made me feel like losing the ability to use my legs was going to be this like big thing and my life was going to change and I was going to be different. And I would love to tell myself, and you never could, but I would love for myself back then to realize like what my life was going to be like, because I really just had very little to cry about. But I wonder if you ever thought like, oh, if I knew this, then things would be easier.
Yeah. I think that there are times where I was like really stressed about picking like, okay, what do I want to study in college? What do I want to do? Like, where is this going to lead?
Choices.
There are so many things that are, like out of your control and you always like, there's time to make those things change. And so I never would have thought I would have been doing this. Even when I started school, like for so long, I didn't know that this was going to become like
your life,
my full-time job. But this is my job. And I think that just, being able to kind of trust your gut and know when something is the right thing for you. And, but also just being flexible and knowing that you're not kind of locked in. Like the decisions that you make today aren't going to be, they're not final and you can always change them.
That's a really good one. I think I'm like that too. I spend a lot of time stressing about decisions that you're like, oh, I feel like if I choose this, it's going to be everything. And then you realize like, oh, it didn't matter at all. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Kendall. This was really fun. It was nice to share your story and to hear more about it, and always love chatting with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. It was so great to have you here. Kendall and I always have a good time chatting, and we're so happy that you guys got to join and meet her and learn a little bit more about her experience in sport. If you're interested in following on her journey, it's definitely continuing from here. She'll be competing in the Winter Paralympics in 2026, where she'll compete in biathlon as well as in Nordic. So you can catch a whole lot more action, and let's be honest, likely a few more medals at those Paralympics from Kendall Gretsch. Definitely one to watch. Thanks, guys.